You can tell a lot about a marriage by the way someone looks at you after humiliating you in public. The ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel glowed gold beneath chandeliers the size of pickup trucks. Crystal glasses clinked softly beneath the hum of string music while executives in $1,000 suits floated between tables pretending their laughter was effortless. Outside, Manhattan traffic crawled through rain-slick streets, but inside Atlas Global's annual gala, everything smelled like money, polished marble, and expensive perfume. I stood near the back of the room with my hands folded loosely in front of me, watching waiters carry silver trays through clusters of smiling executives who had no idea who I was. Or maybe they thought they did. Olivia certainly did. My wife stood near the center stage in a black satin gown that hugged her like it had been tailored onto her body. One hand rested lightly on a champagne flute, while the other touched the arm of her younger brother Ethan Bennett, who was already drunk enough to laugh too loud at his own jokes. The Bennetts loved nights like this. Nights where status could be measured in watches, wine labels, and who got invited to stand closest to the CEO. Richard Bennett spotted me first. My father-in-law's mouth tightened slightly, disappointment flashing across his face like he'd just noticed a stain on an expensive rug. "Daniel," he said slowly as I approached their table, "you could have at least worn a better suit tonight." Ethan smirked into his whiskey. Olivia didn't defend me. She barely looked at me at all. That part didn't hurt anymore. After 10 years of marriage, silence becomes its own language. I adjusted my cuff calmly. "Good to see you too, Richard." Ethan laughed. "Still talking like a businessman even though nobody's seen you work in years." More laughter. Small, sharp, corporate laughter. The kind people use when they want to belong to the stronger side of the room. Olivia finally turned toward me, eyes cold beneath the ballroom lights. "Daniel, honestly," she sighed quietly, "just try not to embarrass me tonight." Her words landed softer than the music, but heavier than the crystal hanging. Overhead, a few nearby executives glanced over, pretending not to listen while listening to every syllable. I could feel their curiosity spreading across the table like spilled bourbon. The unemployed husband, the forgotten spouse, the quiet man attached to a woman climbing the corporate ladder. They all love that story, because it makes them feel safer about their own lives. Then Ethan snapped his fingers toward a passing waiter carrying a silver bucket filled with melted ice water and unfinished drinks. "Hey," he laughed, grinning toward Olivia. "Maybe we should clean Daniel up before he scares the investors." Olivia smiled. Not nervous, not forced, genuine. That smile cut deeper than the joke itself. Before I could step back, she grabbed the half-filled pitcher from the waiter's tray and splashed the dirty water directly across the front of my suit. Ice cubes hit my shoes. Brown liquid dripped slowly down my white shirt, while scattered laughter erupted around the table. Someone gasped. Someone else pulled out a phone. Olivia tilted her head slightly and gave me a smile polished enough for a courtroom. "Maybe now you'll finally stop following me around tonight." More laughter. Louder this time. The room blurred for exactly one heartbeat. I looked down at the water soaking through the fabric near my chest. Whiskey stains. Melted ice. Red wine running slowly down the sleeve of a suit most people in that ballroom assumed came off a clearance rack. Then I looked back up at my wife. And the strange thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. Because the moment people finally show you who they are, the hard part is already over. The laughter did not stop immediately. That was the part most people do not understand about humiliation. It echoes. It rolls across a room in waves, growing louder each time someone realizes there are no consequences for joining in. A woman near the stage covered her mouth while smiling into her champagne glass. Two junior executives whispered to each other beside the dessert table. Ethan leaned back in his chair grinning like he had just delivered the funniest joke of the year. And Olivia, she looked relieved, like pouring dirty water on her. Husband had finally separated her from whatever embarrassment she believed I represented. I reached calmly for a linen napkin from the nearest table and wiped my cuff in silence. The fabric smelled faintly of whiskey and melted ice. Around me, conversations slowly resumed, but differently now. Quieter, sharper. People kept glancing over because public humiliation creates gravity. Everyone wants to orbit it for a moment without getting too close. Olivia stepped nearer and lowered her voice. "Why are you still standing here?" she asked coldly. "Just go home, Daniel." I looked at her for a second longer than she expected. 10 years ago, that face used to soften when she saw me walk through the front door. Back when we lived in a tiny apartment in Jersey City with bad plumbing and folding chairs instead of real furniture. Back when success was takeout Chinese food on Friday nights and splitting gas money to drive down the shore in the summer. Before Atlas Global turned her family into people who measured human value by stock options and corner offices. I am fine, I said evenly. Ethan barked out another laugh. No, you are unemployed. More chuckles spread across the table. Richard Bennett loosened his tie slightly and gave me the same look bankers give to foreclosure notices. Irritated. Detached. Daniel, he sighed. A man should know when he is no longer wanted in a room. I nodded slowly like I was considering his advice. The truth was, Richard had spent the last 7 years believing I lived off Olivia's salary and whatever savings I had left from consulting work. That was the story she allowed everyone to believe. Quiet husband. No ambition. No relevance. A man fading into the background while his wife climbed higher inside Atlas Global. And honestly, I understood why people believed it. I let them. That was the funny thing about power. Most people only recognize it when it arrives loudly. A bigger office. A private jet. Security escorts. They never notice the man standing quietly in the corner watching everything. Marcus Whitmore finally approached from across the ballroom, his midnight blue tuxedo fitting him like a politician running for re-election. Atlas Global's celebrated chief executive officer. The man Forbes called one of the most influential corporate leaders in America. He offered me a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Daniel, he said smoothly, perhaps tonight has gotten a little uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That word almost made me smile. $30 billion in annual revenue. 14,000 employees. 6 countries. And the most powerful man in the company called this uncomfortable. I folded the damp napkin carefully and placed it on the table. I have had worse evenings, I replied. Marcus studied me for a moment. Something small shifted behind his expression then. Not recognition. Not yet. But instinct. Men like Marcus survive because they can smell danger before they fully understand it. Olivia crossed her arms. Marcus, do not worry about him. Daniel likes acting mysterious because it makes him feel important. The table laughed again, though weaker this time. I noticed Marcus did not. Across the ballroom, the giant LED screen behind the stage flashed the Atlas Global logo in silver and blue, while servers refreshed drinks beneath the chandeliers. Music floated softly through hidden speakers. Elegant, controlled, expensive, and standing there with dirty water drying across my shirt, I suddenly realized something strange. Every single person in that room believed I needed their approval. None of them understood that the entire building technically belonged to me. There is a moment in every collapsing marriage when you realize the disrespect is no longer private. It becomes performance, entertainment, a social currency traded between people who think humiliation is proof of status. Olivia turned away from me like the scene was already over. A waiter rushed forward nervously with fresh napkins while pretending not to stare directly at my soaked shirt. Around us, the ballroom recovered its rhythm piece by piece. Forks clinked against china. Jazz floated softly through hidden speakers. Somewhere near the dance floor, a group of investors laughed too loudly at a joke nobody really heard. But beneath all of it, tension lingered in the air like smoke after fireworks. Marcus Whitmore kept watching me. That part interested me. Most people in that room had already dismissed me years ago. Marcus had not. Not completely. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo slowly. Daniel, he said carefully, perhaps we should get you another jacket. Olivia sighed under her breath. Marcus, you really do not have to babysit him. Her tone carried embarrassment, but not for me. For herself. That was the tragedy of corporate vanity. People stop seeing relationships as human and start seeing them as reflections of status. A successful spouse becomes a trophy. An unsuccessful one becomes a stain. I looked toward the giant glass windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked softly down the skyline, while Blacktown cars lined the curb outside the hotel entrance below. 15 years ago, before Atlas Global became a Fortune 500 monster, there were nights I slept on an office couch inside a warehouse in Newark trying to keep the company alive through payroll season. Back then there were no galas. No champagne towers. No executive bonuses. Just fluorescent lights, bad coffee, and invoices stacked higher than the desks. I still remember the winter. We almost collapsed completely. Heating failed in our first distribution center during a January storm, and half the inventory froze overnight. Banks pulled credit lines. Investors disappeared. One board member called me at 2 in the morning and suggested liquidation before sunrise. I was 32 years old, sitting alone in a folding chair wearing a $10 tie from a department store clearance rack while snow hammered the windows outside. Atlas Global was worth less than the trucks parked behind the building. But I stayed. I rebuilt everything piece by piece while men with cleaner suits walked away. Funny thing is, nobody remembers the people who build foundations. They only celebrate the ones standing on top of them later. Olivia never knew most of that story. When we met, I was already hiding from public attention. After the company stabilized, I stepped back intentionally. Lawyers constructed layers between my name and the corporation. Holding companies, voting trusts, quiet ownership structures buried beneath enough paperwork to make accountants dizzy. The board handled operations. Executives became public faces. And me? I disappeared on purpose. Privacy becomes addictive after you spend years watching greed grow teeth around money. You are quiet tonight, Marcus observed carefully. Ethan snorted into his drink. That is because he has nothing important to say. More laughter followed, but weaker now. Nervous. Marcus still had not smiled once. Olivia folded her arms tighter. Daniel always acts like he knows something the rest of us do not. Her words should have sounded mocking. Instead, they landed strangely close to the truth. I glanced toward the elevated stage where Atlas Global's silver logo rotated slowly across the massive LED screen. Beneath it sat the long executive table prepared for the midnight leadership presentation. Reserved seats, gold nameplates, crystal water glasses untouched beneath soft blue lighting. My eyes settled briefly on one particular chair near the center of the stage. Marcus noticed exactly where I was looking. For the first time all night, something shifted behind his calm expression. Small, almost invisible. Instinct. Men who survive corporate wars develop a sixth sense for danger. And in that moment, I think Marcus finally felt the first drop of rain before the storm. The music shifted into something slower as more guests filled the ballroom floor. But beneath the polished surface of the gala, I could feel the machinery underneath beginning to strain. Corporate events are like luxury watches. Beautiful from a distance. Complicated once you understand what keeps them moving. Every smile in that room had a price attached to it somewhere. Every handshake hit an angle. Atlas Global had not become one of the largest logistics and infrastructure companies in the country because good people worked together. It grew because ambitious people learned how to hide sharp edges behind polished teeth. Richard Bennett was one of them. My father-in-law built his reputation inside the company talking about discipline, ethics, and family values while quietly turning his division into a private kingdom. His team hired cousins, golf partners, drinking buddies. Even Ethan, who had somehow climbed into a six-figure executive role despite treating responsibility like an optional hobby. I knew exactly how much money Ethan lost the company last year on a failed vendor contract in Phoenix. $12.4 million buried beneath accounting language designed to look harmless during shareholder reviews. Marcus Whitmore covered it personally. That was how the game worked at the top. Protect the right people long enough, and eventually everyone owes everyone favors. Olivia drifted naturally into that world over time. At first, she hated corporate politics. I remember nights when she would sit barefoot on our apartment kitchen counter eating takeout noodles while complaining about manipulative executives and meaningless meetings. She used to laugh easily back then. Real laughter. The kind that reaches the eyes before the mouth. But money changes people slowly. Not all at once. It happens the way winter arrives in New York. One colder morning at a time until suddenly the trees are dead and nobody remembers when the leaves disappeared. Promotions came. Bigger offices. Better circles. Private retreats in Aspen. Executive dinners in Napa Valley. Somewhere along the way, Olivia stopped seeing kindness as strength. In rooms like this, softness gets mistaken for weakness. And weakness gets punished publicly. That was why she poured dirty water on me tonight. Not because she hated me. Worse. Because she thought humiliating me increased her value inside the room. Across the ballroom, Marcus accepted congratulations from a cluster of board members while pretending to enjoy himself. But I noticed the details other people missed. His jaw tightened every time someone mentioned next quarter earnings. His assistant kept whispering updates into his ear every few minutes. Two compliance attorneys stood near the stage, speaking quietly beside the LED control station. Most guests would never notice those things. I did. Because 3 months ago an internal audit crossed my desk privately through channels nobody inside Atlas Global knew existed anymore. Misallocated infrastructure funds. Executive reimbursements routed through shell vendors. Missing acquisition disclosures tied to a Dallas expansion project. Millions disappearing beneath layers of accounting smoke. At first I thought it was isolated greed. Then I saw Richard Bennett's signature. Then Ethan's approval codes. Then Marcus authorizing silence at the highest level. The company I built was being hollowed out quietly by people who thought nobody was still watching. Daniel. Olivia's voice snapped me back toward the table. Are you even listening? I looked at her calmly. I hear more than you think. Ethan rolled his eyes dramatically. There he goes again with the mysterious philosopher routine. Richard chuckled into his bourbon. A man with no responsibilities always has time for dramatic speeches. Olivia smiled faintly at that one. Small, cruel, practiced. The kind of smile people develop after years inside competitive rooms where empathy becomes a liability. I studied her face for a moment beneath the chandelier light and realized something uncomfortable. She genuinely believed she had married beneath herself now. The woman who once split laundromat quarters with me in Brooklyn looked at me tonight like I was an inconvenience standing too close to power. What she never understood was this. Real power rarely introduces itself. It observes first, quietly, patiently, and by the time people finally recognize it, the outcome has usually already been decided. The strangest part about betrayal is how ordinary it looks while it is happening. Nobody wakes up one morning and suddenly becomes cruel. It happens in small exchanges. Tiny moments. A colder tone at dinner. A shorter reply in the car ride home. A look that lingers too long when someone more powerful enters the room. Looking back now, I can trace the exact seasons where Olivia slowly stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as an obstacle to the image she wanted the world to admire. The ballroom lights reflected softly off the marble floors while another round of drinks circled through the crowd. Somewhere near the stage, a jazz singer began performing old Sinatra covers beneath dim gold lighting. Elegant, controlled, the kind of atmosphere designed to convince wealthy people they are more sophisticated than everyone else. Olivia fit into that world perfectly now. Sometimes I wonder if she always belonged there more than I realized. She stood beside Ethan talking with a group of executives from the Chicago division, smiling easily while they laughed at something one of them said. From a distance, she looked untouchable, beautiful, composed, expensive. Years ago, she used to smile at me like that. Back before Atlas Global became her entire identity. Before every conversation turned into networking. Before every vacation became a business retreat disguised as relaxation. I still remember the first apartment we rented together after getting married. 600 square feet over a noisy bakery in Brooklyn where the radiators hissed all winter long and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing through the plaster. We used cardboard boxes as a coffee table for almost 6 months because we could not afford furniture after paying deposits and student loans. Olivia used to sit cross-legged on the floor eating takeout pad thai while reading marketing books late into the night. She believed hard work could build anything back then. So did I. On Sundays, we would walk through Manhattan pretending we belonged there already. She would point at glass skyscrapers downtown and laugh. One day I am going to work in one of those buildings. I kissed her forehead and told her she would probably own one eventually. Funny thing is, some promises age badly once they come true. Success amplified parts of Olivia that were once small enough to ignore. She became obsessed with perception. Clothes mattered more. Invitations mattered more. Titles mattered more. Somewhere along the line, quiet loyalty stopped impressing her because loyalty does not sparkle under ballroom lights. Ambition does. Power does. Public attention does. The first Real crack appeared 3 years ago during a holiday dinner at Richard Bennett's house in Connecticut. One of his colleagues asked what I did for a living now, and before I could answer, Olivia laughed lightly and said, Daniel mostly enjoys retirement these days. Retirement. Like I was some harmless old hobby. Sitting quietly in the corner while real people built meaningful careers. Everyone chuckled politely. I said nothing. That became our marriage in the years after. Little humiliations dressed as jokes. Tiny cuts spread across expensive rooms. And every time I stayed calm, Olivia respected me less for it. Some people mistake restraint for weakness because they have never encountered controlled power before. Marcus Whitmore suddenly stepped onto the ballroom stage as soft applause spread through the room. The giant Atlas Global logo rotated slowly behind him in silver light while executives moved toward their assigned tables. Midnight presentations were about to begin. I noticed Olivia immediately straighten her posture the moment Marcus took the microphone. Everyone did. That was the effect status has on people. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began smoothly. Tonight we celebrate another historic year for Atlas Global. Applause echoed again beneath the chandeliers. I studied the stage quietly while Marcus spoke about growth projections, acquisitions, and corporate expansion. Most of the room looked hypnotized by the performance. But I noticed what nobody else did. Marcus kept glancing toward the front executive table every few seconds, specifically toward the empty seat reserved beside the board chairman position. My seat. Not publicly, of course. Nobody there knew that. But Marcus did. Or at least he was beginning to suspect something. Olivia returned to the table beside me just long enough to whisper under her breath, "Please do not make tonight worse than it already is." I looked at her calmly. That depends entirely on how honest everyone plans to be tonight. For the first time all evening, her expression flickered with something uncertain. The applause rolled through the ballroom like distant thunder as Marcus Whitmore finished another polished sentence about growth, leadership, and the future of Atlas Global. Giant silver letters rotated slowly across the LED screen behind him, while waiters moved quietly between tables refilling champagne glasses nobody really needed. Corporate celebrations always fascinated me. Rooms full of people congratulating themselves for surviving storms they never even knew existed. Marcus smiled smoothly beneath the stage lights, but I could see tension building underneath the performance now. Tiny cracks. His fingers tightened around the microphone a little too long between transitions. His eyes kept drifting toward the front executive table where one chair remained conspicuously empty beside the board chairman position. He knew something felt wrong tonight. He just did not know what yet. Olivia leaned toward Ethan whispering while both of them occasionally glanced at me with irritation. I could almost hear their thoughts. Why was I still here? Why was I not embarrassed enough to leave quietly? That was the thing about people who build their confidence on public approval. Silence unsettles them more than anger ever could. Richard Bennett checked his watch impatiently before muttering under his breath, "This presentation should have started 20 minutes ago." Ethan smirked. Maybe the mystery board member finally realized nobody cares about him showing up. A few executives nearby laughed politely. I stayed calm. Marcus cleared his throat softly into the microphone. As many of you know, tonight also marks the beginning of a new governance phase for Atlas Global. More applause followed automatically. Most people in the room had no idea what governance phase even meant. They clapped because wealthy rooms train people to clap on cue. Following tonight's executive review, Marcus continued carefully. The board will finalize several internal restructuring measures designed to strengthen operational transparency. Transparency. Interesting choice of word. Richard shifted slightly beside Olivia. Ethan stopped smiling for the first time all evening. They knew exactly what kind of restructuring Marcus was talking about. Internal audits had already started creating whispers through upper management over the last few weeks. Missing numbers. Frozen vendor approvals. Compliance reviews. Quiet panic hidden beneath expensive suits. Olivia noticed my expression and frowned faintly. "What does that look?" she whispered sharply. "You look like you already know what he is about to say." I took a slow sip of water before answering. Maybe I know more than he thinks. Ethan laughed immediately, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Oh, here we go again. Daniel the secret mastermind." More chuckles spread around us. Ethan leaned back, grinning wider now that attention returned to him. "What next? You secretly own the building too." A few people nearby laughed harder at that one. Olivia shook her head in embarrassment. Please stop encouraging him. But Marcus did not laugh. In fact, the moment Ethan joked about ownership, I saw something in Marcus's face tighten almost imperceptibly. Tiny reactions matter, especially from men trained to control every expression. Security staff suddenly appeared near the ballroom entrance, speaking quietly into earpieces. One of them approached the stage and handed Marcus a folded document. Marcus opened it casually at first. Then his eyes stopped moving. The color drained from his face slowly enough that most guests missed it completely. I did not. Neither did Richard Bennett. "What is happening?" Olivia whispered. Marcus looked out across the ballroom again, but this time his eyes landed directly on me. Not past me. Not around me. On me. The room still buzzed with soft conversation beneath the chandeliers, unaware that the atmosphere had already shifted. Marcus folded the paper carefully and forced another corporate smile toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice slightly tighter now. "Before we continue tonight's presentation, there has been a small procedural update from the board." Richard sat straighter immediately. Ethan frowned. Olivia looked confused. I remained still, calm, quiet, the same way I had remained quiet while dirty water ran down my shirt an hour earlier. Because there is something deeply dangerous about a man who stays composed after humiliation. It usually means he already knows something everyone else is about to learn the hard way. The room grew quieter without anyone officially asking it to. That is how real tension works in places built on power. People feel it before they understand it. Marcus Whitmore stood beneath the blue stage lights, holding the folded document like it weighed more than paper should. The giant LED screen behind him continued rotating the Atlas Global logo in slow silver circles, while the orchestra near the ballroom wall faded awkwardly into silence, one instrument at a time. Even the waiters stopped moving. Rich people notice disruption quickly because disruption threatens comfort. Marcus cleared his throat again, but the polished confidence he carried all evening had started cracking around the edges now. "There has been," he said carefully, "a formal directive issued from majority ownership regarding tonight's executive review." A murmur rolled softly through the ballroom. Majority ownership. That phrase landed differently. Board members exchanged confused glances near the front tables. Richard Bennett's posture stiffened immediately. Ethan frowned like he had heard a word he did not fully understand. Olivia looked between them uncertainly. Marcus unfolded the paper again slowly. I noticed sweat beginning to collect faintly near his collar beneath the stage lights. "Effective immediately," he continued, voice tighter now. "All pending restructuring measures will proceed under direct authority of the primary holding trust." Silence spread wider across the ballroom. Not normal silence. Dangerous silence. The kind where people stop drinking mid-sip because instinct tells them something important is happening. Richard stood halfway from his chair. "Marcus," he interrupted sharply, "what exactly is this?" Marcus did not answer him immediately. Instead, his eyes shifted toward me again. This time there was no uncertainty left in them, only realization. Olivia noticed it too. Her face tightened faintly. "Why does he keep looking at you?" she whispered. I adjusted the damp cuff of my shirt calmly. "Because he finally read the document." Ethan laughed nervously. "Okay, seriously, what is this? Some kind of joke?" Nobody laughed with him this time. Marcus inhaled once before stepping aside from the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said carefully, "the board has requested the presence of Mr. Daniel Hayes on stage." The ballroom froze completely. You could hear the faint hum of the hotel air conditioning above the chandeliers. Olivia stared at me first, then Richard, then Marcus. "What?" she said softly. Ethan blinked twice like his brain had lost connection. "Daniel." Marcus nodded once, professionally now. Respectfully. "Mr. Hayes, if you would please join us." Around the ballroom, executives began whispering rapidly. I recognized the exact moment confusion turned into fear inside the room. Because people at the top of corporate structures understand one thing very clearly. Nobody interrupts a live executive gala unless the situation is catastrophic. I stood slowly from my chair while dozens of eyes followed me across the ballroom floor. My soaked shirt had almost dried by now, leaving faint whiskey stains beneath the lights. Olivia grabbed my wrist before I could step away completely. "Daniel," she whispered sharply, "what is happening?" I looked down at her hand for one quiet second before meeting her eyes. "You should have asked that question before throwing water on me." Her face lost color instantly. Richard rose fully now. "Marcus, this is inappropriate," he snapped loudly. "Whatever game this is, shut it down." Marcus remained perfectly still beside the podium. "I cannot do that, Richard." "Why not?" Marcus swallowed once. "Because he owns the company." The words did not explode through the ballroom. They landed softly, quietly. and somehow that made them hit harder. Ethan laughed once automatically, waiting for someone else to join him. Nobody did. Olivia's hand slipped away from my wrist slowly, like she had suddenly forgotten how to hold onto anything. Around us, conversations died one by one beneath the chandeliers while realization spread across the room in visible waves. I walked calmly toward the stage through absolute silence. And for the first time all night, nobody looked at me like a joke anymore. People imagine power reveals as loud moments. Shouting, chaos, explosions of emotion. Real power is quieter than that. Real power changes the temperature of a room before anyone fully understands why they suddenly cannot breathe the same way anymore. The ballroom remained frozen as I walked toward the stage beneath hundreds of stunned eyes. My dress, shoes echoed softly against polished marble while the giant Atlas Global logo rotated behind Marcus Whitmore in cold silver light. Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered loudly anymore either. Fear lowers human voices automatically. I passed tables filled with executives who had spent years discussing quarterly projections and leadership strategies without realizing the man they ignored at corporate events owned controlling authority over every dollar flowing through the company. Some stared openly. Others suddenly avoided eye contact completely. That part always fascinated me. Respect arrives very quickly once money enters the conversation. Marcus stepped aside the moment I reached the stage. Not reluctantly, instinctively. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully. The same man who once introduced me publicly as Olivia Bennett's husband now sounded like he was addressing a federal judge. I nodded once before taking the microphone from his hand. The room waited. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, while rain streaked silently across the Manhattan skyline outside the towering ballroom windows. I looked down briefly at the faint stains still drying across my shirt cuff. Whiskey. Melted ice. Cheap humiliation poured publicly by people who believed they were untouchable. Then I looked up at the room. "Good evening," I said calmly. Nobody moved. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration tonight." My voice carried smoothly across the ballroom speakers. Controlled. Even. Years ago, I learned that calm authority unsettles guilty people more than rage ever could. Richard Bennett stepped forward near the front tables. "Daniel," he snapped sharply. "Whatever this misunderstanding is, we can discuss it privately." I met his eyes. "You spent 7 years discussing me publicly, Richard. Tonight seems fair." Silence hit harder after that sentence. Olivia looked physically unsteady now. One hand pressed lightly against the edge of the table as she stared at me like she had suddenly realized she married a stranger. Ethan looked worse. His confidence had completely evaporated. He kept glancing around the room, searching desperately for someone else to laugh first so he could follow them. Nobody did. I pressed a button on the podium console. Instantly, the LED screen behind me changed from the Atlas Global logo to a series of legal documents. Holding structures, ownership charts, voting trusts, digital signatures. My name appeared across the screen in sharp, white letters large enough for the entire ballroom to see. Daniel Hayes, majority controlling trustee. The reaction was immediate. Audible gasps spread across the room. Several executives stood from their chairs automatically, trying to read the documents more clearly. One board member actually removed his glasses and cleaned them like his eyesight had betrayed him. Olivia stared at the screen without blinking. "No," she whispered under her breath. "That is not possible." I continued calmly. 15 years ago, I stepped away from public leadership after restructuring Atlas Global through a private holding trust. Operational authority remained with the executive board while ownership stayed under direct legal protection. Marcus lowered his eyes slightly. He already knew every word was true. "Unfortunately," I continued, "recent internal audits uncovered serious violations of that trust." Another button. More documents filled the screen. Financial transfers, unauthorized approvals, compliance failures, vendor kickbacks tied directly to Richard Bennett's division, Ethan's authorization codes attached to failed contracts worth millions, executive suppression orders approved through Marcus Whitmore's office. The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers. Richard's face lost color rapidly beneath the lights. "This is selective reporting," he snapped. "You cannot present internal material like this publicly." "Actually," I replied evenly, "I can." Dead silence again. I looked directly at Marcus. Effective immediately, all executive accounts connected to the Dallas infrastructure investigation are frozen pending federal review. Several executives visibly panicked at once. Phones appeared beneath tables. Compliance attorneys near the stage exchanged sharp looks with hotel security. I continued without raising my voice once. Richard Bennett is hereby suspended from all operational authority. Richard looked like he had been punched by invisible air. Ethan Bennett's access credentials are revoked immediately. Ethan's face went pale. Olivia finally stepped away from the table toward the stage. Daniel, she whispered shakily, please. But I was already looking past her now. Because the cruelest part about betrayal is this. By the time people finally realize your value, they usually lose the right to keep you. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the moment after an earthquake when people stand frozen inside collapsing silence, trying to understand whether the ground beneath them is still safe. Nobody touched their champagne anymore. Nobody smiled. Atlas Global executives who had spent the last hour laughing at me now avoided looking directly at the stage altogether. Fear changes posture faster than age ever could. Richard Bennett stood rigid near the front table, face pale beneath the chandelier light, while compliance officers quietly approached from the ballroom entrance, speaking into discreet earpieces. Ethan looked like a man watching his future disappear in real time. The arrogance was gone completely now. In its place sat something smaller. Panic. Marcus Whitmore remained beside the podium with both hands clasped carefully in front of him, like a politician waiting for sentencing. Olivia stared at me from below the stage with eyes I had not seen in years. Not contempt. Not embarrassment. Recognition. The dangerous kind that arrives too late. I stepped away from the microphone slowly while the massive ownership documents still glowed across the LED screen behind me. My name reflected in silver light across the ballroom walls like a truth nobody could shove back into darkness anymore. Daniel, Olivia whispered softly as I descended the stage steps. Her voice trembled now. I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the mascara beginning to break faintly near the corners of her eyes. Close enough to remember every version of her at once. The ambitious girl eating takeout noodles in our Brooklyn apartment. The young wife who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during late-night train rides home. The corporate executive who poured dirty water across my chest because she thought humiliation would raise her value in a room full of wealthy strangers. Funny how all three women were standing in front of me at the same time now. Why did you never tell me? She asked quietly. Around us, the ballroom remained perfectly still. Hundreds of people pretending not to listen while hearing every word. I looked down briefly at the stains still visible along my shirt cuff. Brown marks dried into white fabric beneath the ballroom lights. Because I wanted someone to love me before they loved what I owned. Olivia's face collapsed slowly after that. Not dramatically. Worse. Quietly. The way buildings crack beneath pressure before anyone hears the sound. Richard suddenly stepped toward us. Anger finally overpowering fear. This is not over, he snapped harshly. You cannot destroy